I did not go to Cairn Hall to wake anything. I went because a work order with my name spelled wrong asked me to log crack patterns on Object 114 before the Reliquary Annex lost its funding for the third year running, and because I needed the hours, and because nobody else wanted the job. The annex was a long room at the back of the museum, all skylight and dust, the kind of daylight that comes in soft and gray and never quite reaches the corners. Object 114 stood at the far end behind reinforced glass, catalogued in 1986 as Warden figure, provenance unknown, non-functional. Recovered from the Vesic Hollow dig, the file said, in the same clipped language used for broken pottery and cracked friezes. Ceramic bronze skin, 7 feet at the shoulder, arms crossed over a chest plate gone the color of old milk glass. Nobody had gotten it to do anything in 40 years. Nobody had tried in the last 15. I was not hired for archaeology. I was hired because I have a medic's hands, and delicate restoration work wants hands that don't shake and don't rush, and because my resume said 6 years as a field medic before I came home and needed quieter work. The head conservator, a tired woman named Adagize, who ran the whole wing on a budget meant for one intern, walked me through it in 5 minutes. Log the hairline cracks. Note any new ones since last year. Don't touch the glass. The seal's original. Don't touch the seal is possible, sure, but the joints. Nobody had said anything about the joints. The annex got maybe 6 visitors a week, mostly students doing a class assignment on regional curiosities and leaving disappointed. Adayaze kept the funding request folder on her desk like a talisman, updated every quarter, denied every quarter. The museum's board had stopped calling it a relic sometime in the 90s and started calling it inventory. I understood the impulse. 40 years of silence will do that to a name. You stop expecting an answer, so you stop asking a question, and eventually, the thing you're looking at becomes a shape that takes up floor space and light. I spent the first hour doing exactly what the work order asked. Photographs at 4 angles, a magnifying loop along the crown of the shoulder, where the old crack map showed a hairline fracture that hadn't moved since 1994. I noted it hadn't moved. I noted the dust accumulation in the display base, the slight yellowing of the reinforced glass where UV exposure had done its slow damage, the museum's tag reading NF, non-functional, stenciled in a hand that wasn't Adase's, someone retired or dead now, some conservator who'd made that call decades before I was old enough to hold a clipboard. I noticed the wrist first, because that's where you look, on a person. Old habit. My father was a field medic too, 30 years before me, and the first thing he ever taught me, before I could tie my own boots properly, was where the pulse sits on a wrist, and how to find it without hunting for it. How to lay 2 fingers flat, instead of jabbing with the tips. He used to do it on strangers on the street, half as a joke, checking my pulse at the dinner table like I was a patient who'd wandered in. "You're still here," he'd say. "Let's find out where it hurts." It was the last thing he said to a boy pulled out of the Vesic collapse. The same week the dig brought Object 114 up out of the rubble, half buried and cold. I know that only because the museum's old accession log mentions a field medical casualty, non-recoverable, on the same date, same site, no name attached. I never asked for the name. I already knew it. I laid 2 fingers against the warden's wrist joint without deciding to. Through the glass, which I was told not to touch, but the joint sat an inch past the display seal, where the case had been built too small for the figure's actual shoulders. 40 years of clumsy museum carpentry, leaving a gap nobody had bothered to close. My fingers found ceramic bronze gone warm under the museum lights, and out of nothing but muscle memory I said it under my breath, the way he used to. "You're still here. Let's find out where it hurts." The crack started under my fingers and went up the forearm like frost, spreading the wrong direction. Pale gold instead of white, quiet instead of loud. I heard Adase's chair scrape back across the room. I heard her say my name once, sharp, and then say it again into a radio. I did not move my hand. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't courage. It was the same thing that keeps you kneeling over a patient when the shelling hasn't stopped yet, because you already started, and stopping now is its own kind of harm. The chest plate cleared like a window, losing 40 years of grime in under a minute. Milk glass going to clean glass, and behind it, something that had been sealed dark since before I was born, came up soft gold, slow, the way a lamp warms instead of switching on. 2 more conservators came running with a supervisor none of us had met, and all 3 of them stopped at the doorway like the air itself had gotten heavier. It hadn't attacked anything, it hadn't moved, except in that one slow spreading way, forearm to shoulder to chest, gold hunting through channels that had clearly been built for exactly this, decades ago, by hands that didn't build museum display cases. Someone behind me was already on the phone to building security. A Doeze didn't run. She stood at the edge of the display base with both hands pressed flat against her own sternum, the way you do without meaning to when you're watching something you can't help. I heard her ask, quietly, not to me, not to anyone, whether the seal had ever been tested for a live current. I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer that would have used the right words. The gold light wasn't current. It wasn't light doing what light does when something switches on. It moved the way relief moves through a body when a fever finally breaks. Slow and total and a little late. I understood it before I could have explained it to anyone else in the room. It wasn't waking up to a threat. It was answering a check. The way a patient's monitor answers a hand on the pulse point, not because the hand commands it, but because the 2 things were built, a long time back, to recognize each other. Adaeze was saying my name again, softer now, asking what I'd done, and I didn't have an answer that would have made sense out loud. I kept my fingers where they were, because pulling back felt like walking out of a room mid-sentence. The warden's head came down. Not fast. The kind of slow that costs something. The way it costs a man something to turn and look at a stretcher he already knows what's on it. Its eyes did not open, because it did not have eyes in any way I'd recognize. The whole face was a single unbroken plane of that same clean glass, and what looked out of it wasn't a gaze so much as a weight, settling on me the way a hand settles on a shoulder from behind. It spoke without a mouth moving, the sound arriving somewhere behind my sternum instead of in the air. 2 words, not a title, not maker, not founder, nothing the archive would have had a slot for. Joran Cade, you came back. I have turned that sentence over more times than I can count since. It didn't call me an heir to anything. It didn't ask anything of me. It said my name the way my father used to read a chart before he ever looked at the patient's face. Matter of fact. Already certain. Already glad in a tired sort of way. You came back. Not you're the one. Not you're chosen. Just, you came back, and I've been here the whole time, and that was the arrangement, wasn't it? I learned the rest slowly, over the weeks after, from records nobody had cross-referenced in 40 years, because nobody had thought a museum object and a field casualty belonged in the same file. Object 114 had been dug half-crushed out of the same collapse that took my father, on the same afternoon, in the same square meter of rubble. He'd been the last one to reach it before the roof gave a second time. Whatever he'd done in those last minutes, and the report is too clipped, too clinical, to say for certain, it had been enough to matter to something that measured time in centuries. It had waited the way a patient waits on a table, sealed and quiet, for someone with the same hands to come check the pulse a second time. I don't know if the warden is a weapon, or a monument, or something that hasn't got a name in our language for what it is. Adaeze wants a report I can't write yet, and there's a supervisor above her wanting one I definitely can't write, and I've given them what's true and left out the rest, because the rest isn't theirs. What I know is this. I didn't come to wake a warden. I came to check on a patient the day's paperwork had marked as non-functional, 40 years too soon. It just took my whole life to get an answer back. 2 words, no title, said the way you'd say a name to someone you were always going to see again, once they finally remembered to come find you.